Okay. Okay, we're actually way past time, and I want you guys to hear this talk. So we're going to ask you to sit down, and let's get started with our next group that is working on something that we hope is going to benefit all of our individuals with Angelman Syndrome. So Donna Herber, Mike McCandless, and Angela Poff are all here from Disruptive Nutrition, which I just love that name. And Donna's going to start us off, and I think she'll do the introductions for the people that she's going to introduce. But I just want to say that she's bringing 23 years of experience in medical science research and product development to Disruptive Nutrition, and she's going to talk to you about what they're doing in terms of getting this product together. Angela's going to tell you about the science behind the product that they're going to tell you about. And then Mike has, it says here, 17 years of experience in development and manufacturing of nutritional supplements for improving athletic performance. So I think you have a little bit of a key of what we're going to be hearing about and how exciting this is going to be. And I will turn it over to Donna.
Thank you. So as she said, I'm Donna Herber. And we've been working with the University of South Florida in collaboration on this project. So in the labs of the people that we're working with, we have as a lead Dr. Eb Weaver and his student Stephanie Charlone. We are also working with Dominic D'Agostino, and also here with us today is Angela Poff. And Angela is going to go over the basic science, the preclinical work that is leading up to the product development that we're doing.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, so what is a ketone? So ketones are natural compounds that are made in our bodies during certain situations when our bodies are burning fat. So that would be any time that you're calorie restricting or during fasting or starvation, our body will start to break down those fats, and parts of that is turned into ketones. Or it could also be when you're consuming a diet that is very high in fat. Now, ketones are actually a very efficient energy substrate, and they can serve as an energy source for pretty much all the tissues in the body. And importantly, they can actually replace glucose as the brain's primary fuel. So you may have heard of glucose before, and we know this is a really important energy for the body, but ketones are an alternate substrate that our bodies and our brains can use. And they're actually extremely efficient energy molecules. They actually kind of give you more bang for your buck in terms of how much energy they make compared to the other energy metabolites like glucose. And so we can kind of consider when the brain is running on ketones, we're enhancing the energy reserve capacity of the brain. And that's really important, even in a healthy individual, but especially in an individual with some kind of neurological deficit. Because the brain is a very energetically active organ. It requires a lot of energy. But ketones are more than an energy source, so they actually have very important roles in signaling and communication in the body, and they're very protective, especially to the brain. So they're anti-inflammatory, they inhibit inflammation in the brain, and they also will decrease the amount of oxidative stress in the brain and enhance the body's own protection or antioxidant defense systems against that kind of damage. And they also improve motor performance, and we think this has to do with that efficiency of the energy molecule. So ketone supplementation, I've just told you about some of these really nice beneficial qualities of metabolizing ketones, but I told you our body only makes it in those kind of nasty situations like starvation or fasting. So what people are doing is trying to find a way where we can orally supplement ketones so we don't have to rely on those dietary restrictions to get ketones in the body and get those beneficial effects. And so people are developing these ketone supplements. They are a source of calories, so they're a calorically dense molecule. And again, I want to emphasize this is something our body makes naturally, but we're just supplying it from an exogenous dietary source. This can give us a dose-dependent elevation in our blood ketones. So you take a certain amount of the ketone supplement and you pretty much instantly within 30 minutes are going to see an elevation in these molecules in your blood. And it can provide pretty sustained duration of this elevated ketones. And we can get the elevation of all three of the ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. And this is just some human data, a single administration showing that you can get this elevation in ketones. So I'm just going to show you some data that has come out of Dr. Ed Weber's lab at USF in using the mouse model of Angelman syndrome that you've probably heard about before. This is a UBE3A maternally deficient mouse model, and we know it recapitulates a lot of the symptoms that we see in human AS patients in terms of they have motor deficits like ataxia and balance and coordination difficulties, as well as some other abnormal motor behaviors. They also exhibit some cognitive deficits. They're prone to seizures, and they have impaired learning and memory. So in this study, the animals were given a diet where 10% of the diet was replaced by a ketone supplement, so it was orally administered. And first things first, yes, we do see an elevation in those ketones in the blood of these animals, both beta-hydroxybutyrate here, and then also acetoacetate. And this is particularly important because acetoacetate, that ketone, and its derivative, acetone, one of the other ketones, are the ones that have been pretty extensively studied and shown to have pretty potent anti-seizure and anticonvulsant effects. So we do see an elevation in these molecules in the blood. Now, here we did a few studies looking at how these ketone supplements would affect motor performance in the animals. This is a study that's called an accelerating rotarod. Basically, you put a mouse on a rod that's slowly rotating, and then over a course of a couple minutes, it's speeding up. You see how long that animal can walk on that rod. And of course, it's going to be indicative of its balance and its motor coordination and function. And so what we see, animals that don't have the disease, they can stay on this rod and walk on it for a long time. Untreated Angelman syndrome mice are impaired in their capacity to do that. But when we give the ketone supplement, we see an improvement in this behavior. The animals are able to walk on that rod longer, meaning that they have better motor performance. Two other techniques looking at motor performance that were performed on these mice. Here we have the hanging wire test. This is essentially we allow a mouse to grasp a little wire with their forepaws. We see how long they can hang on. So this can be indicative of muscle strength or muscle fatigue. And so what we see is that the Angelman syndrome mice, of course, they're not able to hang on to that wire as long as their undiseased litter mates. But then when we treat with the ketone supplement, we can rescue some of that deficit, and they're able to hang on to that wire longer than those untreated Angelman syndrome mice. And on the right here, we have the hind limb clasping severity score. So in mice that have neurological disorders, when you hold them up by their tail, they retract their hind limbs, and we call that hind limb clasping. So it correlates with the severity of their neurological deficit. So what we see is that in the undiseased animals, they don't exhibit this behavior because they don't have any neurological deficit. When you look at the Angelman syndrome animals that are not treated, they of course exhibit this behavior. And when we administer the ketone supplement, that is rescued to a certain degree. They don't have as severe hind limb clasping, indicating less of a neurological deficit. Here, we're looking at a few tests of learning and memory that were performed on these animals. On the left is a fear conditioning test. It's essentially a test where you teach a mouse that when they hear a certain sound, they're going to get a mild shock on their feet. They're standing on a grid that delivers a shock. You come back at a later time point and see if when they hear that sound again, they freeze. That freezing behavior means they remember what's coming, that shock is coming. And so it's a way to tell if the mouse had learned what that sound meant and then remembered it. And so what we see is that the Angelman syndrome untreated animals have an impairment in that ability to remember that sound. But when we're treated with the ketone supplement, they actually responded similar to the undiseased animals. And then on the right, we have the novel object recognition test. And this is just where, so mice will naturally want to explore a novel object over a familiar object. And so if you introduce some objects to mice, come back later, replace one of them with something that's new, and you measure how much time they spend exploring those things and see, were they able to remember that this one object was familiar, or did they not learn that? And so what we see again is that in this study, the animals that were treated with the ketone supplement performed similarly to those that didn't have the disease. Here we also looked at the effects of the ketone supplements on seizures, and we did 2 types of seizure induction. On the left, canic acid, it's a chemical that's used in studies to induce seizure. You can see that the animals that were treated with the ketone supplement at various time points following the administration of this chemical, they exhibited less seizure activity compared to their untreated litter mates. On the right, we're looking at audiogenic induced seizures. This is just a seizure that is induced by a certain sound. And so what we saw was that in the untreated Angelman syndrome animals, about 84% of those animals exhibited a seizure when they were exposed to this sound. But that was reduced by about 50% in the animals that had been treated with the ketone supplement. And not only did we prevent seizure in such a large portion of those animals, we dramatically increased how long it took for those animals to seize. So we delayed the onset to seizure. They had to be hearing that sound for a lot longer before they actually seized. Okay, so these were some of the studies and the findings that we came up with. We were able to elevate the blood ketones with this exogenous ketone supplementation. We reduced seizures, we improved motor function, learning, and memory in this model. We have a few ideas of why we think this might be occurring. We know that it probably has something to do specifically with elevating acetoacetate and acetone. These are those ketones that have been shown to possess intrinsic anticonvulsant properties. We also saw that this administration of the ketone supplement can increase the amount of GABA in certain areas of the brain. So as you probably know, that it's thought that there's an abnormal decrease in the inhibition in the brain of AS patients, and that leads to some of their deficits. And so if you are able to increase the amount of GABA, you're increasing that inhibitory signaling and possibly is responsible for rescuing some of that deficit. We also think it probably has something to do with improving metabolic efficiency. Providing energy to run all of the things that our neurons have to do is very important and is now being studied across a wide range of neurological disorders and deficits. We're seeing that this seems to be extremely important. So enhancing that metabolic efficiency and energy production in the brain is probably also responsible. And then they have a lot of other functions that I haven't gone into today, but could also possibly be playing a role.
All right, so I'd like to go into kind of what our product development pathway is and where we are now. So again, I'm Donna Herber. Angela is with the University of South Florida. I'm with this new startup company, Disruptive Nutrition. Okay, so the ketogenic diet, Angela mentioned it briefly, and one of the things that I needed to learn about when I first started this as well, being a carbaholic myself, was about the ketogenic diet and really what all the metabolic effects were. Keto meaning blood ketones, right? So when you're on a ketogenic diet, you're naturally raising the level of these ketones in your blood and also in the brain. And that's the reason for why it's called the ketogenic diet. And when we're talking about this in a patient population, it's been used for a very long time in the epilepsy population. Very strict version of this is a 4 parts fat to 1 part other. That other can be a mixture of protein and carbohydrates. A very strict version of the diet is the 4-to-1 or maybe a 3-to-1 ratio in the diet. A more modified version that has been used as well is a 2-to-1 ratio or 1-to-1. But in all these cases, this is a very restrictive diet. No pasta, no rice, definitely no cupcakes on birthdays. And so there's a lot of difficulties, even when you see a benefit, say in reductions in seizures on the ketogenic diet, when you have a slip, or when the patients with Angelman syndrome or patients with epilepsy have a high intake of sugar for, say, a cupcake on a birthday or pancakes with syrup on Sunday morning, that it can trigger seizures. So the restrictions on this diet can be very difficult to make it, to stay with it, to adhere to it. So what we're trying to do is develop a product that would be a ketone booster without a lot of these restrictions. Our ultimate ideal would be that, yes, you can still have the cupcake on the birthday, right? You can still have the pancakes on Sunday morning and not have these issues of going back into seizure activity or other issues that are associated with the syndrome. So it is an oral administration. Not sure about the form yet, but again, it's something that you just take by mouth. And it is a source of calories. So like food, it is a source of calories. We hope to see dose-dependent elevation of blood ketones without the dietary restrictions, that this would be rapid and sustained levels of blood ketones, and that all three of the blood ketones will be raised: beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. And these are the three naturally occurring ones in your body. So there are a lot of different paths that you can take a product like this. And one of the things that I was asked to provide some education, and this was for myself as well. I come from kind of a pharma background, but to understand, what is the difference between something like this as a dietary supplement, as a nutritional supplement, and what is a medical food, and how does that differ from a drug? And the best explanation I found was at the FDA's own website that was talking about, think of it as a continuum. At one end of the spectrum, you've got broccoli, you've got milk. At the other end of the spectrum, you have drugs. And somewhere in between that, we have a lot of dietary supplements, and we have some medical foods that are on the market as well. And I've circled the medical food because we believe this is the path that will work best for patients with Angelman syndrome for our product as we develop it. As this continuum goes up, you see increased amount of data that is necessary to prove what you think your product does. You see increased costs to bring it to market, increased time to bring it to market, increased oversight by the Food and Drug Administration. And so that's one of the things I want you to consider as you think, well, what are the differences between these? And another key difference is what you can say about what it does. So what a dietary supplement can be marketed as in terms of treatment claims or things like that is very different than with a medical food or with a drug. So dietary supplements are just that. Originally, they were intended for healthy people who just wanted to supplement their diet, right? Vitamins, minerals, amino acids, herbal extracts, things like that. But on the basal level, these are relatively healthy people who just want a supplement, a little bit of a boost. You have to be very careful about, as a manufacturer or a distributor of these materials, what you can say about them. You can make so-called structure function claims. Memory aid, but not treatment of dementia. Okay, so there's a distinction between what can be said about these products. The safety criteria for producing these products is just along the lines of enough data to show that there is a reasonable expectation of safety. So this is kind of just moving up the spectrum, but not at the same level as a medical food or a drug. So what is a medical food? A lot of us have never heard of this before. This is a new space that not a lot of people use them, and so not a lot of people have heard of them. As we move up the continuum, the level of safety requirements for these products is higher, so it falls under what's called GRAS, generally recognized as safe, which is a higher level of burden of proof that the material is actually safe for the people who would consume it. In this case, you actually can make treatment claims if you have clinical data to prove it. Okay, so you can't go out there and take animal model data and say we can treat humans, but if you do treat humans and you see a clinical benefit, then you can actually make treatment claims, which is different from a dietary supplement. Drugs, of course, we understand that they're intended to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease. So the very, very highest of standards in terms of scientific proof, clinical proof, safety of the material, clinical efficacy of the material, high cost, and high time to market. So again, just think of this as a continuum when you're considering what it is that's being suggested. So for us, with our medical food path, we're talking about nutritional management for patients with Angelman syndrome. It is a medical food. It's for the distinctive medical needs of patients. It's used under a physician's care. Okay, so this is not something that you're going to find on the shelves at GNC. This is not something you're going to find on the shelves at the drugstore or at the grocery store. The child's physician, the patient's physician, will be monitoring their response to make sure that this is appropriate for them, monitoring weight gain, monitoring tolerability, monitoring dosage, monitoring blood ketone levels to make sure that this is appropriate. The product is very calorie dense and will be consumed orally, increasing blood ketone levels, and our hope, our sincere hope, is that this can be used with a standard diet. So here's our path to bringing a product to the market. We are at this step 1. We're in the product development stage. We first started talking about this. Mike was talking to me, he'd first heard about Angelman syndrome in May of this year. Okay, so we've come a long way since May, but this is very, very new for us. We have material, we're sourcing it, we're formulating it, we're talking to clinicians, we're talking and working with Dr. Weber, but, thankfully, it's not a long process, but we're still very early in the process. And like I said, we do work with USF. I am located in Tampa, so I've worked with Dr. Weber and Dr. D'Agostino for many, many years, and it's exciting to be on this side of it, to be able to bring something to you that we hope will work. One of the things I want to point out is at the end stage, when we have a commercial product that's ready, there will be a lot of education that will be necessary because this is a product that is used under a physician's supervision. So we'll need to make sure that the families are educated about what this is and that clinicians are educated about what this is to make this the most successful and to reach as many people as possible. So with that, I'd like to introduce our founder, Mike McCandless.
There won't be any science with my my slides, so don't get too excited about that. When you guys probably heard the word startup, it probably creates a little bit of anxiety because I think we all started having flashbacks a couple of months ago to Turing Pharmaceutical, which is the company that took the drug from $13 to $700 immediately. So I think when people see probably someone near my age getting near anything like this, it starts to scare everybody really bad. So I just want to give some quick background. I named the company Disruptive Nutrition on purpose. Disruptive meaning I wanted to cause as much chaos as humanly possible in the pharma world because I'm obviously in the nutraceutical world. And what we're trying to do is take nutraceuticals and be able to give them essentially medical claims, and that's what disruptive nutrition is about, is taking nutraceuticals that we can make medical claims with and be able to go into medical foods. As mentioned, I have over 15 years experience doing everything from funding studies, manufacturing. So when this was brought to me in May, and it has been that short specifically with Angelman's, one of the issues is getting these technologies and be able to manufacture them on a large scale, be able to manufacture them in a compliant facility, have proper testing protocols. These things have been around for a while. This isn't really that new. The problem has been being able to get all this stuff manufactured. I'm happy to say that in the short period of time that we've been involved, we are scaling production, we're building testing standards, all the stuff that I was actually quite shocked had not been done. So taking my resources from my other companies, which is in sports nutrition, and I know that once again can create a little bit of anxiety because we think of big meatheads and all the stuff that you hear negative in the press. Going to the disruptive heritage by funding studies and doing the things that I've done, we have a background in trying to do things the right way, but we got to be careful not to be in a ready, fire, aim situation. We want to get this stuff to you guys, obviously as quick as possible, but also making something that's shelf stable, that meets label claim, that will stay there for a long time. And that's a process. So just understand we're working, as quickly as we can. It's a daily thing. I have hired recently a new CEO for one of my other companies to step away to help manage this project because of how passionate it is for me. I got involved in this because my mom 4 years ago was a cancer patient diagnosed. I went into the chemo ward, saw how everybody had an extreme amount of muscle wasting. And so I'm like, well, one of our best-selling products is built around limiting muscle loss in athletes. I got in touch with Dominic D'Agostino down at USF. I was like, hey, has anybody ever researched using these ingredients before? And he was like, no, nobody's ever really looked at it. It's probably going to have negative outcomes and probably accelerate tumor growth. 4 years later, we have seen exactly the opposite. We've actually spent a lot of money looking at different research, and in that is how, as a side item, I got involved into the ketone technologies, because once people saw that we were authentic and trying to do this stuff the right way, people started coming to me about, well, hey, can you help out in these other areas using your manufacturing expertise and so on. And we've been able to do that. And the thing that I'm probably most proud of is I don't have any investors. I'm not accountable to anybody other than myself. I started as a kid in a nutrition store who thought that's all I was going to be doing, and started an internet business selling products online, and things just continually fed on themselves. And in the past 3 years, almost every major pharmaceutical company has sent a board member either to my warehouse or to find out who my angel investors were, which I don't have any. So my goal is to make these products as safe as possible and as cheap as possible. I have other businesses that take care of what I need to do. This is a personal project for me because the same therapies that we talk about for Angelman's also work in many other cases and other diseases, and one that affects my mom. So, which she went from one type of cancer to another. The doctors told her that, it was a very dim diagnosis, but she's actually still kicking around and doing very well today. So this is a personal passion project for me, and I think that's how all of you sort of get into this, is once you learn and it affects you, the money is irrelevant. It just comes about, you're just trying to help people. We're a new company. You guys don't know anything about us, and this is, I know, sort of a first impression. So I just want you guys to know, at least hearing it from me, that that's our goal. I don't know what the time frame is going to be. Just know that we're working as fast as we can with as many resources as we can to get this done. As soon as I realized some of the impacts, I immediately went out and got Donna to come work with us, and then we're working what I feel like is some of the best team down at USF. I've funded tons of studies and been around a lot of different universities. I've never been more comfortable with a place in my life as far as doing stuff. So I'm super excited. I cannot answer hardly any medical questions whatsoever, so please do not ask those of me. I will default to the women who always know more. But I'll be happy to answer any questions if you guys have anything specific about the business stuff or any of the history and stuff like that. And then I think that keeps us on time and leaves a little time for questions if anybody has any. So thank you.
Okay, so we have some time for some questions. And we have people making their ways to the mics.
Hello, my name's Kathy. And you said that this would be prescribed by a doctor or overseen by a doctor. And we do have nutritionists that manage things for our children currently. Would a nutritionist be qualified to do that?
Honestly, I don't know a direct answer to that. I know that when I've worked with some of the clinicians before, what they do is they refer the patient to the nutritionist. So I think it's kind of a collaborative effort, especially in the beginning when you're talking about looking at monitoring blood ketone levels, making sure and looking at weight gain, weight loss, things like that. I think it's going to be a collaboration. I can't imagine that this would be solely run through a nutritionist. I think it much like everything else that you have to do with your children, right? That it's a collaboration.
Would it be a general doctor, a general health doctor, pediatrician, or
I don't think
internal
it matters.
medicine?
I don't think it matters.
You don't think it matters?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I will say the government has, when you get into medical foods, it's sort of an area for them that they're not overly clear on the rules. So sometimes when the answers become very vague, understand that's because we haven't been given tremendous amount of guidance yet. So they're still figuring this out. This is a really hot area right now as far as medical foods because it's very expensive to get into. You don't have the pharma upswing with it, but so there's a lot more attention now. We'll probably get a lot more clarity from the FDA because if you ask them outright, the answer you get will be different when you ask them a week later. So I know that shocks everybody, but yeah.
I'm Claire. I've got a question about, can you explain to me the difference, the positive negativity of the ketones as compared to like ketoacidosis, that side?
Well, ketoacidosis also affects the blood pH. So ketoacidosis occurs in diabetics, right, when their glucose and insulin levels are all messed up and then way too many blood ketone levels, but also an acidification of the blood. So this is what we are referring to as therapeutic ketosis. So this occurs naturally during fasting. This occurs naturally with a high-fat diet. So we're not expecting, based on lots of information on the diet side as well as animal data with the supplements, that there would be anything other than this therapeutic ketosis rather than the ketoacidosis. This is an excellent question because it comes up a lot, and people have heard of ketoacidosis and say, "Ooh, this is bad," but this is therapeutic ketosis. So thank you for asking that. Thank you for bringing that up.
And then, do you have information like, is it comparable to the raspberry ketones? Is that what it's called?
Raspberry ketones, do you know anything about raspberry ketones? I know they're not the same.
Yeah, they're, when we say ketones, we're referring to 3 molecules specifically that are called the ketones or ketone bodies. And raspberry ketones are, it's kind of confusing terminology because it goes back to the organic chemistry nomenclature of the molecules, but they're not at all related. And I wanted to add also, it's all about the dose. So I've heard ketosis, therapeutic ketosis, compared to ketoacidosis as comparing like a fireplace fire to a house fire. And that's exactly the same. You're looking at great higher levels of ketones in your blood during
That's what I need.
ketoacidosis. So
Thank you.
These technologies are not currently available, so anything that you think is a cross-reference to this or whatever, none of this stuff is currently available over the counter or somewhere else, and that's one of the things we're dealing with the FDA right now.
Thank you very much. There's nothing we would love more than to be able to give our daughter normal food. That would be great. So thank you for your interest in this. I think this question may be for Angela. In those mouse studies that you showed, it seemed like in each of the things, the cognition, the epilepsy, the motor function, there were responders and non-responders. If you look at the y-axis, did you find there were certain mice that responded in all categories and certain mice that responded in none? Or were some got better with motor but not epilepsy, and the other way around? Was it dispersed, or how did you find that data?
that's a very good question. To my knowledge, that particular aspect has not been looked at specifically to see if the same individuals that respond in terms of reducing seizure also were the ones that responded in motor or learning. Dr. Weber, do you have any insight into that I'm unaware of?
Yeah, I don't think that there was any. Yeah, we didn't see any differences between the mice that were significant. So we kind of keep an eye on that to see if one set of mice do better than another, especially if we're doing therapeutic treatment. So, the question is, because all these mice are genetically similar, you don't see those kind of variations. So I've said this before in other talks, all the mice that we use, they're all identical twins. So the genetic variation has been removed out of that mouse model. So what you see in that particular genetic strain is what you're seeing. We saw good response on the group of animals that were treated on all those aspects. So there were none that did well on the motor coordination but didn't do well on the learning and memory. If you look back over the data, and it's important to say that this is all unpublished data. So we're pulling this together for publication, but it's you guys are seeing this for the first time. So we didn't see anything that was differential in a particular mouse for one versus the other. They were treated as a group.
Great, thank you.
During the mice study, were the mice monitored before and after for medical things such as cholesterol or weight gain, and how did their diet differ when they were on the ketones as to before they started the study?
Things like blood lipids were not measured. Weight was measured, and the animals did not lose a significant amount of body weight. Compared to not treating, they stayed within a healthy weight range. How did their diet differ before? Is that what you're asking? So they were previously eating a standard rodent chow, which is about 50 to 60% carbohydrate, about 20-something% protein. So when you add this supplement, a significant source of their calories then are now going to be coming from ketones, which can kind of be classified as fats. They're derivatives of fats, but they're not one of the macronutrients. So it did alter the macronutrient profile slightly, but it was only 10% of their overall diet that was coming from the supplement. So it wasn't a major shift, really. It was definitely in the realm of supplementing the diet. As you know, if a human was taking this, you would have to consider this as a caloric source and consider it in your caloric needs.
So did they gain weight while on it if they were allowed to eat their regular rodent chow?
They didn't abnormally gain weight, no.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I have a son that's almost 4. We've had him on modified Atkins for about 6 months now. And we originally started it for seizures, but we have seen many of the gains you guys have talked about of motor coordination and memory and learning. So it's been really great for us. But my question is the hope with a supplement that you can then work back to just a very standard diet, or would the hope be to still kind of keep them on a somewhat modified but not have to be as strict?
And this is some of the things that we're trying to take into consideration when we're going to design what to do with the children in the clinical study.
Mm-hmm.
The hope to normal diet with this as a ketone supplement. The reality might be somewhere in between. You know,
Yeah.
and we just really don't know until we try.
Yeah.
But the goal would be a normal. Although that sounds bad, right? A normal Western diet, the like bad Western diet. But that would be the hope.
Yeah.
That would be the hope.
Okay, great, thank you.
I'm Ann Anderson. I'm part of the Fast Fire team, so I'll talk to you in the afternoon. But I'm also a child neurologist and an epileptologist. And we routinely use ketogenic diet as a therapy for intractable epilepsy. And so we have a lot of experience taking care of those children, both on an outpatient basis and working closely with a nutritionist, but also when they get sick and come in the hospital for non-neurology and epilepsy-related problems. So related to the first person's question about who manages this diet and the children, and it's never the nutritionist alone, it's the nutritionist, and it's one specifically working with your neurology and epilepsy team, at least at most big centers. And I think you probably want to look for this when this becomes a routine therapy, which hopefully it will after the initial human studies. But what happens is these children, as you heard, are ketotic and acidotic, and they have a baseline level of that. When children and adults get sick, and children get sick very fast, as you know, as parents, and what happens then is they get more acidotic. They get dehydrated because they don't feel good and they're not eating, and eventually they end up on a pediatric floor or in the PICU. And the first impulse of those specialists is to run D5 through the IV. And we very often hopefully get consulted, and we have to intervene at that point because that can make their condition even worse, and it can also make them start seizing, so now they go into status epilepticus. So I would encourage you, even thinking about the ketogenic diet, that should be done under the guidance of your neurologist or your epileptologist, who then works really closely with the nutritionist. And I think it's probably with this therapy, it may be a more broader child neurology, not just specifically epilepsy, if we see learning and memory improve and we see motor improvement. And you may also have the therapist, physical therapy, occupational therapy involved, and neuropsychology in assessing improvement and monitoring as time goes on. So I just wanted to make that point since I was back in line with the other parents, but it was related to the first question.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope we can talk after this. That would be great.
My daughter Lila is 6, and for her whole life she's been supplemented with Pediasure to meet her caloric and nutritional needs, mostly because she doesn't have the desire to eat or the functionality to eat. Is this supplement something that's going to be able to be given through a feeding tube, or is it something that they're going to have to be able to orally take in?
We're actually looking at multiple formats for it. We had been advised that in some cases gel cap would be appropriate because a lot of the children are used to taking those or having those administered. But no, the goal would be that we would also have a formulation for those that are tube fed, because there's no reason on our end at this point to limit it.
Cool. Great.
Yeah, I'll say at this point, everything, these ingredients start as a liquid, and it's not the best tasting stuff. I'll just leave it at that. We have already converted it over to a powder, and then we're trying different versions from there. So, yeah, there's not going to be a limit on the number of ways we're going to try. We'll just have to find out what's actually feasible and what really works. But, yeah, by the time we get to the point of getting the study done, I will have as many ways possible as be able to how to take it. So.
Okay, I know we started late, so I don't want to cut this off, but I want this to be the last question because I know you're all going to come back late from lunch too. So, because I will. All right, so
Okay.
we'll have you. with the last
Sorry,
question.
this is opening up a whole other can of worms. My daughter's 27, has had cyclical vomiting problems, like vomiting blood since she was a breastfed baby infant. Not everyone's kid has that, but stomach problems are a big part of this. When she does throw up, you will see food come out in layers from 2 days ago. So she does not have a specific diagnosis of gastroparesis. She has mom's diagnosis. And besides, serious laziness, that's one of the reasons I've never considered a ketogenic diet, because the most easy to process food are simple carbohydrates. And plus she is very well controlled seizures for like 2 decades. Would this be something that would work for someone who you wouldn't consider or has never attempted a ketogenic diet?
Well, it seems from what everybody has been talking about, in addition to what we presented, that there are multiple benefits to the ketogenic diet. And also when we tested these supplements in the mouse models, we saw benefits beyond the effects on seizures. So motor coordination, learning, and memory. And so I would hope that we would have the opportunity to explore that so that we could see in the spectrum of symptoms that each patient has where we can have a positive impact. But I honestly just don't know yet, but I hope so.
Okay, well,
So,
this is the first time ever that I've heard that the ketogenic diet affects anything but seizures. Because I know a lot of other people, her peer group that have been on it and have done, not people with Angelman's, but have had wonderful, like miraculous benefits. And then a lot that had to get off because of cholesterol or all switch victim syndrome, where they skinny away to nothing. So that's what I was wondering. Could this be used then for people who you wouldn't consider putting on the diet?
I think you also have to keep in mind too that stopping seizures is a pretty miraculous thing in terms of our kids,
I know.
right? So
I mean,
sometimes
that
it's hard to
was-
tease those things
hey,
out
if
for
that's
sure,
all we ever
right?
got our whole life, that
Yeah.
was good enough.
I guess something that would help her with her question is like, how quickly is this absorbed, and how quickly does it change the levels in the blood?
Within 30 minutes. It's very
Okay.
rapid.
All right, because she's not the only person whose children have this issue with their gut, so
Sure.
that's a really great point. Okay. All right, let's thank the team from Disruptive Nutrition. Okay, and now we will disrupt our own nutrition. Lunch is actually right next door, so go grab your lunch, and then we'll see you guys back here at 1:25.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.